Uncharted is one of those series that I've always heard good things about, but I've never really had a chance to play. Well, I mean, I've never even been able to play it since I don't own a PS3. But I finally bought into the hype and bought a PS4, which came with, you guessed it, Uncharted. Specifically, Uncharted, the Nathan Drake Collection, the remastering of the single player and the 3 PS3 Uncharted games. I'll be looking at each of these 3 games by Naughty Dog, remastered by Bluepoint Games, with the first being Drake's Fortune. First off, I guess, should be the visuals. Again, I don't have a PS3 to play and say the entire original game, but I will say that this game does look great. It's a game meant to look fairly realistic, and it does that job well without making it look too dull. Comparing it with the PS3 version, it certainly seems to be improved detail-wise, but the colors also seem to pop a little less. However, that's a small nitpick considering those details and of course the introduction of silky smooth 60 frames per second. Even though it may not look jaw-dropping, it for sure is pleasant to look at. One of the best ways to see these great visuals is through the cutscenes. There are plenty of them throughout the game, although the way they're paced seems a bit off at times. You'll go from a flood of cutscenes and story to pure gameplay for an extended period of time. While that'll help the gameplay flow for a bit, when you do go to the story parts, it'll seem a little jogged down until you get going again. It's not that big of an issue, as the cutscenes and gameplay are still very enjoyable. It's just that you may feel inconvenienced when you keep getting cutscenes or seeing none whatsoever. For the actual quality of the cutscenes, they're pretty representative of the game as a whole. Cheesy, cinematic, adventurous fun. The game itself is almost like you're playing a blockbuster action movie. There's definitely some heavy inspiration from Indiana Jones, but it borrows all the right elements. Cheesy but chuckle-worthy dialogue, ridiculous action sequences, a seemingly realistic story with some fantasy elements to it. All of it isn't necessarily original in terms of film, but it is one of the first times we'd seen something like this come to video games. Really, it works just as well, if not better, as the silliness fits the fact that it is a game. Although now in 2016, this kind of budget and movie elements may not be as groundbreaking as it was in 2007, it still manages to hold up. That's not to say that every cinematic component is perfect, namely the story. To sum it up, we've got Nathan Drake, aka Mr. Action Hero Man. He's got to find El Dorado, taking after his ancestor Sir Francis Drake, who is apparently a real person, but Nathan Drake's not. Along with the filmmaker turned adventurer Elena Fisher and witty friend Victor Sullivan, 2 not overly original but still fun and interesting characters. Beyond those 3 though, the only real other memorable character might be Eddie Raja, a sort of villain or rival. You can tell by his chemistry with Nathan they have a history together. The rest of the characters, with the few that there are, just amount to being pretty boring and generic. Overall, the story is fairly predictable and stereotypical. Still managed to be fun and adventurous for the most part, but there are certainly some messy pieces, namely more towards the end. Another cinematic element is the music. It's fully orchestrated and filled with bursting brass, energetic violins and strings, and other instruments that very much make you feel like you're off adventuring into the jungles of foreign lands. Sometimes it feels a bit samey and often ends kind of oddly on sort of a cliffhanger, even when what the player is doing may not match up to that. While the soundtrack may not necessarily be all that memorable, with the exception of its theme, it fits very well with the atmosphere of the game. Now we get to the bulk of the game, which is of course the gameplay. It's basically split up into 2 parts, shooting and platforming. From what I've heard, the shooting mechanics of Uncharted 2 have been put into all of the Nathan Drake collection, and to me that seems like a great addition. I will give a disclaimer that this is the first and only twin-stick shooter I've ever played. All the other shooters I've played have been on PC using the superior mouse and keyboard, so this was something a bit different in terms of precision when shooting. However, the shooting ended up feeling pretty natural. It's pretty simple as a whole, especially considering you can only carry 2 guns at a time, 1 handgun and 1 long-range weapon. You can find which ones that you like the most and keep using them as you collect ammo, although as you progress, guns available may change over time. The game generally plays as a cover shooter, with the player taking cover behind something and waiting until the right moment to spring up and shoot an enemy down. To be honest, it can seem a little tedious at times, just being a rinse and repeat as you move along. But there is still a good amount of environmental changes and challenges, like the jet ski segments, although those are pretty sluggish, and places where there's nothing to hide behind. Of course, it's also broken up by another thing, platforming segments. I've heard a few times that these platforming segments are dated, and I can only kind of agree with that. It can be a bit clunky running around and jumping from one surface to another. I mean, Drake doesn't exactly move like Mario here. It can be more fun when he scales along the side of a cliff or building, somehow managing to find a ledge wherever there can be one. I would have probably enjoyed it more if it managed to combine the platforming and shooting other than just a few times where you'd be shooting people hanging off a cliff. As it stands though, it's decent filler type stuff in between the shooting sections. Along with the pretty generic and easy puzzles that the game has, I don't think it would hold up nearly as well without the idea of it being an adventure. And this spirit of movie-like adventurousness helps with the feeling of the puzzles and platforming. In addition, there are collectibles, however they're clearly more of an afterthought considering they're just little shiny spots slightly off the path of the main game. They might be more fun for a completionist, but otherwise you're probably just going to ignore them. Overall, the game really isn't that long, clocking in about 10 to 12 hours max. Once you've been through the campaign, there's not much else to explore or do within the game. While I'd find it hard to see this as a justified $60 buy, the used PS3 price or bundled PS4 version seems much more worth it. All in all, the Nathan Drake Collection port doesn't change a ton from the original PS3 version of the game. I mentioned earlier how the visuals and shooting mechanics were updated, but beyond some new game modes and trophies, there really isn't much new. However, I don't think there's much the game needs to change. It really is a fun movie-like action-adventure game. It has some shortcomings in the platforming and story, but by and large the good stuff outweighs the rest. I'm looking forward to Among Thieves, but for now I'll give Uncharted Drake's Fortune an 8.5 out of 10. If you own a PS3, definitely buy the game, and it seems right now like the Nathan Drake collection is going to be worth it as well. Not worth a PS4 by itself, but a good way to start off owning one. Thank you so much for watching my review of Uncharted Nathan. Wait, what was it again? No, Uncharted Drake's. Drake's Fortune. For the Uncharted Nathan Drake collection for the PS4. If you liked the video, press the like button, press the favorite button, comment, give me feedback and stuff. So look forward to that next video on Uncharted 2. If that is the next video, I will go through all 3 games. The next 2 videos are probably going to be a little bit shorter because I basically summarize the basics of this series. But, thank you for watching. I will see you next time.